I just love it and I don't know what I'm doing. And I need some containment and rules, and let's just start from the beginning. It was vulnerable, but it was also like, oh my God. I think I even said to you, like, I just feel like I'm in the sandbox, like I'm in the playground, and I'm like, I got some toys, but I don't know how to build the castle. And that was where we started from. And I was like, oh, that's really fun and joyful.
What is up? My name is Douglas Nyback. This is the DNA Podcast. Today I'm talking to Kelly Shaw, who is a world-class dancer. And by world-class, I mean is flown all over the world to some of the most prestigious companies on the planet. She's an artist who's been operating at the height of her powers in the dance world for probably most of her life. And now she's making a transition into film and television performance. It's such a phenomenal crossroads to get her at, because I'm fascinated by artists who pivot to new things, because we need to be able to and be willing to transition our instruments into mediums that are unfamiliar to us. And Kelly is approaching her process in this regard so bravely. I'm lucky enough right now to be a part of her process as she's moving forward into this new career path. And for anybody who's listening, who's an actor who's either just starting out or who's an artist who's at a very evolved state in your chosen profession, who's thinking about trying new things, this is, I think, such a wonderful and beautiful conversation where there's so much space made for the willingness to try something new. And I work with a lot of dancers, and this conversation I think is going to be extremely relevant to anybody in that community as well. So listen, without further ado, let's just get into the conversation. But this was a really special one, and I'm grateful to have had the chat. And again, this is the DNA Podcast. I'm your host, Douglas Nyback. Let's go. Okay, Kelly, first off, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to be super transparent because I definitively have kind of an agenda for our conversation. Not really an agenda, but like an arena in which we can sort of play. You're very fascinating to me because you're a professional dancer. You've been professionally dancing for over a decade at this point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you're now making a transition, maybe not making a transition, but adding a new skill set, and you're transitioning into acting, which I find fascinating because like I'm like a professional artist in a lot of capacities, and during the pandemic I was like, I'm gonna pick up guitar again, and it's just like, I'm like, oh man, there's so much that I don't know how to do. And I thought this was such an interesting moment in your life for us to have a conversation about acting, because you're such an advanced artist and you're such a baby actor. So talk to me about how you're feeling about your journey in the world of acting so far.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Recently in a coaching session that we talked about being an amateur at something, and how there is discomfort that can come with that, and potentially old stories or things that potentially I have worked through or overcome in a sense in the modality of dance, or in these skills that are more honed. Mm-hmm. And then, yes, of course, they're going to pop up when I'm a baby or new to something. And it's super confronting having a career and having a certain level of success and rapport and reputation. And I don't audition for dance things anymore. I feel grateful that I have also earned that, and I don't feel, there's not a whole lot of insecurity in the realm of dance anymore in terms of getting work in that space.
Right.
And now venturing into something where I've even said to you, why am I doing this? Like, if I've had success in this other area that feels good, and we like momentum, and also as a human being, my ego wants to predict and control the things that are going on. And this formula equals success. This formula equals moving in a trajectory that feels somewhat linear.
Yeah.
And so, feeling so passionate and excited about adding this skill set and finding something that feels like truth inside of acting. It's like this doorway that like unlocked itself for me. Like, it felt like it wasn't even really a choice. I just sort of like fell into it, and it felt so good and true and important. And now feeling that feedback or feeling that confrontation of, but you're successful and you know how to do these other things, and there's a level of comfort there.
Right.
Why?
So this is really interesting. So do you mind me asking how you fell into it? That was such an interesting way to explain it. So what was that process of falling into acting?
It's interesting to try to put a magnifying glass on it.
Yeah.
I've always felt really connected to theater and acting and the element of dance that requires storytelling. And for most of my dance career, I've always gotten a lot of feedback about my ability to storytell, and it has felt like something supernatural to me, supernatural.
Yeah.
And in the last 8 years or so, I've really taken to immersive and site-specific dance work as well, where character and development of those characters were just as important as the technique of the movement. And so last year, this past year in the winter, I was performing in a show based on Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I was digging into this character and spoke with a dear friend of mine, Brie Wasilenko, and wanted to move more deeply, like mature the character.
Right.
And she mentioned an acting class that she takes, which is super somatic and really based in play, and thought that I might connect with the way that they approach the work.
Right, and this is MAP, right?
This is
Actors?
MAP,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, it's a really cool methodology and such a great creative free space for actors. It's like
Yeah.
all about the exploration of play, as I understand it. And I do think that, like myself included, like I'm so, as a coach, generally product like oriented. Like people come to me to learn how to book work. And I love that that's not what MAP is about at all, and what they offer there is so freeing for so many actors, which I think is great. So it's cool that you found that first.
Yes, and that's what has been so interesting about the journey, is like I fell into that to give me a different skill set, or potentially a different perspective, a different way in. And because it's so embodied, it felt like a playground and like something that I was really familiar with. Like, of course, I was using text, but I didn't feel far, like removed from what was happening in that space. And
Right.
so it really was aligned in terms of helping me to develop my work as a dancer and as a performer. And there was text that I was playing with in this show. And there is something that was unlocked, or it reignited a deeper part of my artist that came, not even deeper, another layer of my artist that was invited to the table,
Right.
or invited into the room when I was in that space. That, like I said, I kind of fell into it. I fell into it for a purpose of dance, and then went, oh my God, there's something here.
Right.
That feels like it's a phone call I have to answer.
Cool.
Yeah, and then it really enriched my process in the dance studio, and I just kept going back. And then when I had to step away for other contracts, I really missed it, and thought, why don't I just move towards something that feels true?
Right.
And something that feels interesting and exciting, and I'm like rather allergic to feeling stagnant.
Yeah.
As many artists are.
Yeah, talk
like,
about that.
Where's
right?
the next fire? Where's the next challenge?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'd love to flag that, because we've had a couple of people on the pod who've said that, like as many artists are, like, and then you said running towards the fire, all that stuff. And what's really interesting is I actually find actors are very good at dismissing this about themselves, because in my experience, and I've worked with, like, at this point, hundreds and hundreds of actors, and you would be shocked at how many actors actually look at the house that's on fire, run up to it, run around the side, cover themselves in soot that's already fallen off the house, pick up a rock that looks like the baby they're supposed to go save, and come out, and then run around, and they're like, I did the thing. And it's like, no, you didn't do any of it. You did not run into the fire. You did everything you possibly could to not run into the fire. And so I do think that I wanted to flag that, because I think that actors need to cultivate that, artists need to cultivate that. And I think that we often dismiss it in ourselves as like, oh yeah, no, everybody has that, or I've always had that. You know, like I would say that I run into the fire now, but I used to think my way around the fire to like a monomaniacal degree as an actor. And so, no, not everybody does that, and that is a unique skill that you have, and it's a great one. So,
and I think to that point, like having the experience of 15 years as a dancer and befriending versions of suffering and difficulty and the fire of vulnerability, I feel like it's happening at this time, and I'm able to make this transition or open that next layer of vulnerability as an actor because of that. I really, truly believe in the timing of this, especially.
Right.
Yeah, I was not ready. I definitely would have ran right up to the door, decorated myself in all of these ways, and then I think I did it. And I feel it happening now too. Like, as you were saying, you work in a very product-oriented way. Once we started working together, I was so comfy being vulnerable in the flames of play and process.
Yes. Yeah.
And then we started talking about using process to get a product, and that there is a framework for this, and there is a formula, and there is a very important skill set, and it all gets braided together. And if you thread the eye of the needle with specificity, then you can sew anything. Then everything becomes possible. And so it's that specificity that now I'm just starting to rub up against and feeling resistance around. Like, we talked about this the other day. Why am I doing this? What is now it's hard.
Will you are you comfortable with me talking about some of what we've talked about in our sessions?
Yeah, please.
Okay, cool. The safe word is banana. If you're ever like, I don't want the world knowing this about me. And I say that jokingly, but I mean it. Like, the process that we go through in coaching is as private as you want it to be. But it's interesting. So we talked a lot about masculine and feminine energy, and here I just want to caveat: we're talking about the energies here. We're not throwing hand grenades into the world minefield. But when it comes to, you're so comfortable in that feminine energy, that energy of creation, of exploration, of feelings of allowance. Like, i.e. that narrative, I need to allow myself to experience this, I need to allow myself to feel. And it was really cool because it came to a head in a coaching we did, our last session, where I was like, do the thing or don't. You can't allow yourself, like, I can't allow myself to sit on this chair. I'm not like, time to allow gravity to work. I either sit in the chair or I don't sit in the chair. And I was actually talking to Bree about this, the analogy of the light switch. Like, the process of creativity and creation, to me, is about wiring the building. The job of an actor in the moment is you either flick the switch or you don't. You can't think your way into all of the wiring. It's either there or it's not. The light's either going to come on or it's not. And the process of, like, product-oriented performance, i.e. we're on stage, we're getting this ready to work, like we're doing a show on stage, or we're getting you ready to work on set. It's like we're past that allowance stage to allow yourself to feel. No, start doing things and you will feel as a result of it, right? Emotion is to acting what sweat is to working out. It happens if you engage. And it was really cool because that feminine energy is such a superpower for you. To the degree that I don't know that you're aware of just how far ahead of the game you are in that regard. And it's really interesting being the teacher who's coming in and being like, okay, but maybe a container, maybe a cup.
Yeah.
You just get pouring.
Yeah.
Get pouring into that container.
Yeah.
You know, and I find it, like, to me, working with you, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you on the pod is because working with you is so interesting to me. I work with a lot of dancers. I work with a lot of dancers that have usually come to me after they've worked with a lot of acting teachers and coaches. And I'm just gonna, like, casually talk shit about a bunch of acting coaches in my podcast. But I'm gonna do it. Most dancers that come to me have been f***ed up by acting teachers who have been like, I can tell you're a dancer. you're present as a dancer and all this. And so they come to me and they're like, well, I got to be small. I have to be all these things because some person in black flowy clothing who hasn't worked in 3 decades decided that they stood too straight one time. And as opposed to saying, hey, thank God you have a pre-existing skill set in which your body is going to tell the story instinctively. And all we have to really do is listen to it and teach it how to communicate in a new medium, rather than being like, hey, everything about you is wrong. And so I feel so grateful, and it's literally the first time that I've ever worked with an actor first. A dancer first as they make the transition into acting. And I've been learning how to do it, rather than trying to undo something somebody else up and then help somebody find their truth, because you're already there. You're already operating really instinctively from a physical standpoint. And so much of the work that we've done so far has been about you speak something aloud and your body literally responds, because that's how you exist in the world. And us being like, there, that's the thread, let's pull. Let's give that a little bit of structure. Let's figure that out. And it's been such a delight. I don't have a question here. I'm just talking about process. And it's been really interesting to me. And I feel very grateful to finally, for literally the first time, be able to be like, oh, well, what if we just develop your instrument as is, as opposed to start from, hey, this is wrong and everything about you is wrong and you're not in dance anymore. Let's just take something that's incredibly useful, listen to it, foster it, build it, and provide it the structure it needs so that it reads on camera. Yeah. It was very cool to me.
I feel, often you talk about like pointing it in the right direction, or as I said, like just threading it through the eye of the needle. The eye of the needle sometimes to me, more recently as we've been looking at product, starts to feel really narrow and really specific, and that's what kind of freezes me up. And some of these old, like, I'm not doing it right, or I have to do it perfectly, comes into play. And yet there is this spaciousness in the way that we work together, where you just make the eye of the needle a little bit bigger and remind me that you play all the keys when you dance. Yes. Like, you're not avoiding these areas that feel uncomfortable, or restrictions that there might be in spaces. I've learned how to navigate that, and I trust the way I warm up for a show. And then nowadays I say the most exciting part of performing is what's going to go wrong and how the we're going to figure it out in real time, which is quite literally what happens when I get into that flow state. And I think, there is a beauty in sort of, and I hadn't thought about it in that way, that I was at MAP, which really helped me recognize every time I would say, oh, but it's just the dancer in me, and I would frame it as something negative, and then the coaches would say, why are you taking your superpower?
Let me caveat quickly and say, I didn't get my hands on you first, and Meredith at MAP is so fantastic. And it's wonderful that she didn't stifle you, and whoever you were working with over there didn't stifle you. Sorry, just to, I don't want to take credit for something that I actually didn't do. Continue.
Totally. I worked with 2 coaches, Sam and Chelsea.
Great.
And Meredith as well. And I was constantly being reminded of the reframe. That is your superpower.
Great.
Why are you trying to take away the thing that other actors work a long time to have a sense of this embodiment, or have a connection from head to tail? And then coming in and working with you, and you also not trying to squash that or stifle it, and say, here are the parallels. You know how to run this track. Like, it's really similar if we can, I hold the lock and the key, as they say.
Yes. And I think it's interesting you brought up that run this track, because I often parallel athletics to what we do. And again, that idea of telling a dancer that, like, you can't be yourself. It's like, well, I mean, you've got 2 choices as a teacher, right? You've got like if I'm a football coach and I've got somebody who's never done anything athletic in their entire lives, or I've got somebody who ran track, my process isn't going to be one, pick the person who can't sport. And it's not going to be, hey, you've run track. Well, let me tell you something about football. Football isn't track, so you better stop running and stop running out. Like, I'm going to be like, hey, cool, how do we, like, you're probably pretty good at the fast stuff. That's great. Now let's do the catch C, jump C. I don't play football. But, you know, and so to me, this feels very organic. And I'm really glad that you're entering in this capacity, because it can be so step. Like, I came from musical theater. When I went into film and television, I wasn't even a person. Like, I was just like a collection of like a Broadway Douglas, and so I was also really fortunate that I didn't have teachers that were like, be small. I had teachers who taught me the framework that I needed to pour myself into, and I was really lucky because it saved me a lot of time.
Yeah, and there's something freeing in knowing that the availability of volume and bigness and expression is there, and like people like you and I with this type of background have access to that.
Yeah.
But then the specificity and the subtlety of choosing something so much more simple and nuanced is so juicy to me at this point. And I think, again, it's because I've had this time and I've developed myself, and I kind of understand, you know, you need big to touch small. Like, we need the duality for these things to land. And so it's fun to be able to not have any of that range erased.
Yeah.
And you said something at one of our most recent coachings. It's not easy, but it's simple. And we talked about staying with simplicity, especially for like the way my intellect and my brain likes to come online and override what's happening in my body. And there's so much gold and genius in here.
Yes.
So yeah, that like simplicity
Yeah.
of like, yes, we can play in the macro and I can play in the big range and go to those places, but like, you're working too hard now. Like, you actually can just.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that concept of I'm working too hard. I want to clarify. It's like, it's usually in film and TV, I think, not that we're working too hard, it's that we're doing things that we don't need to do, because they're being done by the script, they're being done by the location, they're being done by the context, they're being done by the other actors, they're being done by the camera. The camera does so much heavy lifting for us. So it's like, what are you actually responsible for? And are you or are you not doing that thing? Because if you're not going to book it. And if you are, then odds are you're going to be in the running. This is great because it's very on brand with the way we work. Because you've talked now, or we've talked a lot about expansiveness. Well, I mean, like, you've talked about expansiveness. I've kind of talked about acting teachers. And now, and things that are easy, and all of these places in which you are actually really coming at this from an advanced level. Now I want to ask, are there any sort of like friction points that you're bumping up against that that you know, like, first off, like, what are the friction points, if there are any, you know, and then I'll ask further questions, I guess, about it. But what are you coming up against where you're just like, didn't expect this, oh, I don't know if I like this, about the whole process?
I might be like bumpy and stumbly with my language, because
Please.
I'm still, really in the mud with it all too.
Yeah.
But certainly understanding that there's like homework and research and a frame that needs to be like, I need to go to class, to dance class, to maintain my technique so I can show up at a rehearsal where there's partnering being asked of me, so that that technique can carry me through. And then I can trust, and then I can get into the flow.
Right.
And that exists in acting as well.
Right.
And there's something that happens with my brain when I want to do that homework, or I want to start to learn what that process is. And it's not just play, and it's not just feel your feelings and be in your body and do the stuff you're good at.
Yeah.
And be the performer. Mm-hmm. Like you say, like, that's not the skill set that needs as much work at this point. That ends up feeling a bit constricting, and I try to over-intellectualize and plan the route instead of, like planning and perfecting. We talked a lot about the perfectionist
Yep.
showing up, and then within that, diagnosing myself with why that's wrong or what's not allowed, or, oh, you're getting too in your head about this now. Oh, you're planning too much. Oh, now you've overcorrected. So like, for example, I approached a scene that we were doing and I just let the feminine pour out and Kelly really showed up and there was so much beauty there, and I wasn't telling the story, and there were parts of that archetype and that character that were not present. So potentially
you're playing like a military trained cop. Archetype,
some good acting, not telling story.
Yes.
So again, product not there, not going to book, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so then the shame gremlins show up. You did it wrong, and then once I kind of digested that and gave it some space, I went back and started to have a lot of fun with, okay, what's a different approach here? Like, acting is not going to be playing Kelly. Okay, cool. That's what you signed up for.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. And then I swung so far into the masculine that I started to feel so faux about it.
It was almost like you were disembodied.
Yes. Lost my body, didn't allow my superpower to come online, and wasn't able to integrate that like perfectionist and the intellect and all of the things that are a part of me that would have served that character. I was like, you don't belong here. And so I don't know how clear I'm being right now, but it's this total back and forth between how specific to be and then that not sort of paralyzing me, and the absolute of this is the right way or the wrong way to do it, and wanting it to be linear. Okay, now Doug, give me the notes so I can go and I can take the script and I can do my research and I can watch all the shows. And some of it feels really good, and then some of it, oh my God, I'm bad acting, and I feel it in my body. And I'm like, well, this is not for me.
Yeah. You're just like, screw it. It's interesting. You talk about, I'm bad acting. I'm acting bad, right? There was Meryl Streep was doing a Broadway show, and they, of course, turned it into like a TV documentary because that's now like the way to get butts and seats to go see theater. And of course, all the producers and all the other actors that weren't Meryl Streep were like super excited about this idea of like, oh yeah, cool, we're doing like there's gonna be cameras on us, this is great, this is good exposure, all these things. And so they're doing all the interviews, and Meryl Streep was just like, I don't approve of this. and she was like, because the audience is not supposed to have access to our bad acting, and that's all rehearsal is. It's just the bad acting. It's us getting all the bad acting out of the way so that we can do the good acting when we're on stage doing the show. But it's like, this is not for you. This is the bad stuff. And I think that's such an important thing to understand about the process of growth. If you're existing in the land of this is good or it's bad or it's right or it's wrong, you got a problem. It's more about, is it or is it not the thing that's written? Like, is it actually that thing in all of its nuance and intrigue and all of its richness? It either is that thing or it's not. And everything that goes into the process of finding that thing, that's just exploration. There is no good or bad. They don't even come into play. There is no right or wrong, right? It's either what's written or it's not. That's like to me, we go into that simple, not easy.
Yes, and you said something else. There's all these like quotes and like taglines of Doug Nyback are like flashing my head right now.
I love it when
perfect.
People quote me to me. Let's go.
You said right now you're doing a great job at saying what you don't want to be and what you want to be, but not what you are.
Yes.
Like the I am was missing.
Yeah.
And I felt it like in my solar plexus. I was like, right. In my overcorrection, which had so much gold and like it was really cool to feel that.
Yeah.
There was just the simplicity of, but who are you and what are you trying to do? Just talk to the other person was being left out, which is truly the simplest part.
Yep.
So it's like, there are these like complicated things potentially, or not complicated, more complex parts to setting yourself up so that you can understand the character and you can understand the story and you can do the text analysis. And then once that's done, I am the shit out of it.
Yeah, like again, I go back to like in that particular instance, it's like a character trying to get another character off a bomb. It couldn't be simpler. There is this very specific task ahead of you, and you either, everything is pointing towards that task or it's not. Like, it's very simple.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, that concept of so many actors, like if there are any beginner level or intermediate level actors that are listening to this, which presumably there will be, the takeaway here is that and I did this all the time as an actor, because I also wanted to be right and good, and then everybody would love me, I would get notes, and I would have a giant list of things that I shouldn't do. And really, for the most part, what my teachers were telling me were like, hey, do this thing. And I was like, so I'm not gonna do all these things. And then I would get into my take in the next week for class, and I'd be like, oh, cool, I didn't do any of the things. Like I said, so they'd be like, so what did you set out to do? And well, I didn't want to do this, I didn't want to do this, I didn't want to do this. And then they were like, okay, cool, you didn't do anything. Congratulations.
That's exactly
you didn't do
happened.
anything.
It's exactly what happened.
And this happens to me, like I see actors do this all the time, right? Because of course, like, and there are things, like I don't want to flail around like a crazy person with my face. I don't want to like be so loud that the boom operator is going to want to murder my entire family. Like these are important things, and there are technical things that we need to learn. But if you go into a take, whether it's in class or on set or whatever, with a list of I'm not going tos, then you're not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And that's it's just a completely antithetical way to work, as opposed to what do I need to do? And then you find out that this list of, things that I don't want to do, they're usually symptoms. They're not the disease.
Right.
The disease is I'm not doing this. Because like, you're not going to be tap dancing if you're trying to get me off a bomb. That's going to make us explode. Yeah. You're not going to be overly loud because I'm going to freak out, and that's going to make us explode. You're not going to be massively, hugely empathetic because I'm going to be like, why did they send a wellness guru to get me off a bomb as the other actor? That doesn't make any sense, right? So is it pointing towards the story or isn't it? Like, and that's usually the best place to start. And then if there's technical things that need to be worked out, you can work them out. It's like an easy thing to fix, relatively. Like, you don't want to move your forehead, put a piece of Scotch tape on your forehead, you'll stop real quick.
Yeah. It's like the simple psychology of it too. It's like when we think about what you don't want to do, that's what you end up focusing on.
Yeah.
And then there's no space for the actual acting, the action, the reacting.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like a version of paralysis, but it also feels like there is a trust of, I think what I'm learning too, that maybe I'll share, is that when we have these beautiful, deep discussions afterwards, trusting that my instrument, which is really well developed like in an emotional sense, and then my intellect is really grasping the concepts in a cerebral level, that whatever I'm meant to digest and take in that moment, it's going to percolate, it's going to digest, I'm going to sponge, the instrument is going to take what it's meant to. And so I don't need to go home and make a whole bunch of notes about what I don't. Yes. So I've been practicing going home and just taking the one-liners. It's not easy, but it's simple. Yeah. These things that like my artist is like, oh, that feels so juicy. That feels so true. That's why I love to do this. What lit me up about our session, not what made me feel like I can't do this.
This is a concept I've been thinking about a lot lately. I can't remember who it was. It was somebody I was listening to on the Modern Wisdom podcast who said, ease is efficiency. And I was like, as somebody who has been like, you know what I would like to do with my entire life? Plant limitless fields and seed them all with suffering and struggle, and then one day I'll just die. I was like, ease is efficiency. Wow. And that is such a great way for you to look at this. Like, what lit me up? That's a place that it is in whatever direction that is taking you is the place that you will get the most growth. It doesn't mean that you're not going to need growth in areas that aren't lighting you up at the moment, but who gives a those are going to become prevalent anyway, and you can only focus on so much stuff at this moment anyway. So follow the thing that you are the most motivated to follow, and you will experience the most exponential growth. Like, that makes so much sense to me now at 39 after a decade of therapy, you know?
That's definitely a part of it. And understanding that we can't grasp all of the things all at the same, like we can't hold it all.
Yes.
It's too many spinning plates.
Yeah.
And so, when I'm bumping up against resistance, I don't want to learn these lines, or I don't want to do this scene because it's not as easy for me as the other ones Doug gave me.
Fair.
And so that's showing up. And because I'm not working, full time as an actor, I'm like, why am I suffering? Like, why am I doing this hard thing that I'm choosing and no one is asking me to do?
Yeah.
I have to come back to these moments that, like, I go to MAP or I come to coaching with you, and there might be a little bit of crunchiness or a little bit of resistance, but every time I leave going, and there's more breath and there's more life and there's more space in my body, and I go, well, that's it.
That's great.
That's it. So then now, what was the takeaway? What was the shimmer of that, or that sparkle of joy, and knowing that the feedback is all a part of it. It's like, I need that, because again, we make full circle back to the beginning of this conversation. I'm an amateur.
Sure.
Like it.
And amateurs,
it's new.
Amateurs can be movie stars. Like, that's also the crazy thing about our industry. Like, there's no shame in saying I'm an amateur.
Yeah.
Like, the vast majority of people that are on television are intermediate at best.
And not weirdly, it's freeing actually for me. Well, our very first session, the most freeing thing that I could do that I haven't been able to do as a dancer, because I started when I was 6 and now I'm 36. So 30 years later, I can't go, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to probably be able to get a lot of chops that way. But I showed up and you were like, why are you here? What do you want to wear? And I was like, I just love it. And I don't know what I'm doing. And I need some containment and rules, and let's just start from the beginning.
Right.
And it was vulnerable, but it was also like, oh my God. I think I even said to you, like, I just feel like I'm in the sandbox, like I'm in the playground, and I'm like, I got some toys, but I don't know how to build the castle.
Yeah.
And that was where we started from. And I was like, oh, that's really fun and joyful, and is a bit of, again, feels powerful if I don't add the story of, and now it's going to take so long for you to be successful or book anything. It's like, I actually have no idea.
You don't. No. It's very true.
Yeah, and this anecdote that you have talked about, like a teacher or someone that you worked with that said, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know.
You tell me what's going to happen.
Yeah. You tell me what's going to happen tomorrow. I think about that.
I think I made like a brief video on my, like, the old TikToks about this, but this was a story. It's a good story for the pod if you don't mind me telling it again.
Yeah, please. Front row seat.
Yeah. So I was really fortunate early on to work with a leading man named Grant Bowler on a show called Defiance, and he was really kind. I was out in LA. I was and he met me for lunch, and he took the time to really chat with me and mentor me. And he told me this story about when he had first come over from Australia. Like, he'd been on a successful show in Australia, he came out to LA, and I think he something to the effect of like 100 auditions, didn't book a single thing. You know, all of the money that he'd made on that TV show gone. You know, and back to Australia, and there's, you know, the whole huge group of people who are like, oh, I'm so sad I'm so sorry that it didn't work out for you. And what did he do? He got on another show, and he worked until he had enough money to go, and he got married and had kids, all this stuff, and he went back to LA, and he did it all again, and didn't book a thing, and failed, and now is like in debt, and flew back to Australia and ran into somebody he went to theater school with at the airport, and the guy did that thing. He was like, oh, I'm so sorry it didn't work out for you. Maybe you shouldn't, go to LA, and that's just tough. Not everybody's cut out for it. And Grant just started laughing. This guy was like, what are you laughing about? And Grant was like, yeah, you're right, man. Like, I don't even know where I'm sleeping tonight. I don't know where my kids are gonna sleep tonight. I'm like 40 grand in debt. He's like, so why are you laughing? And he looked at him and he's just like, because you tell me what's gonna happen tomorrow. And what happened was, one of the tapes he did was for True Blood, and he got a call, and the next thing he knew, he was shooting the hottest HBO show on the planet, playing a werewolf, doing werewolf things, and his career, kept moving from there. It's shocking how, that's why when actors are like, I'm only giving myself 2 years, I'm like, well, Jesus, like, you don't know. You don't know how long this is gonna take. You don't know when that person you did a short film with a decade ago becomes the next, series director or showrunner, or finally gets their dream going, and they're going to be thinking, like, you don't know, which I find so fascinating. And you also don't know, from a standpoint of development as an actor, when these things are going to coagulate. But you will, if you work at it. Every actor that I've ever worked with whom has really worked hard at it wakes up one day and the just starts working. It just happens, and it starts being effortless. And you reach that arrival point, you break out of the plateau, and suddenly you're like meteoric growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's developing the other skill sets and understanding yourself, and like gathering other crystals along the way, rather than staying like super myopic and I just gonna only commit myself to just learning how to act. And I think I have the benefit of being multidisciplinary already.
Yes.
That helps me to understand that I need to give breath and space while I develop this skill. Me just like burning it with that magnifying glass in its little Petri dish is not going to, Petri dish. It's not going. Tea tree oil for the face.
Tell me your woo-woo without telling me your woo-woo. Yeah.
It's a really good Freudian slip.
Yeah.
My Petri dish, like burning it and thinking that that's the way it's going to land or drop in. And luckily, I also have the experience of dance, and that wasn't the way. And the harder I gripped, the worse it got. Or not the worse it got, but yeah.
Well, and this is like, this is one of the reasons why, again, one of the other reasons why I wanted you on the show. Like, my hope is that dancers, like, because at the end of the day, like we talked about this with Alex Chaves earlier, like at the end of the day, the job starts, cashing check or writing checks that the body can't cash. And I think you're coming at this at such a great time. And in that, I'm not saying you're there, I'm saying that you're creating pathways to use the superpowers that you have in another medium. And I hope that other folks in the dance world will hear this and see this episode and sort of see, oh, there's a springboard, and I actually have so much value to bring, into that world. I just need to figure out what it is and if it lights me up. And whether it's acting or it's some other creative pursuit, could be teaching, could be owning a studio, could be like, there's all sorts of things, but there are springboards, and the skill set that you have is so applicable. And I want to talk about one thing quickly that happened in a session, our last session, and that I've talked about this a fair bit already on this podcast, and we're only 5 episodes deep, so eventually I'm going to have to start talking about something different. I often say that actors have to sit down honestly at the instrument that they are on any given day and play the keys, despite the fact that they might not actually like the keys that exist there. And we talked about this. This came up in our last session because you're starting to get to the place where it's like you have instinctive responses, whether it's to shut down or it's to lean into something more heavily than the scene requires, or and everything points somewhere. So we're starting to get into the narrative of like, hey, are there or are there not keys that you don't want to be playing? And I'm not going to take this time in this space in the podcast to be like, now give me the specifics, and all of our listeners, the specifics of your personal trauma. That's really not what this is about. But what I am curious about is, how do you feel about that being a part of the job? Having to sit down authentically at parts of yourself that, at least, last week or this week, you might not want to.
Yeah.
How is that process? Because I don't know how that manifests in dance, but I would imagine it's not quite as specific.
It's not. And yeah, it's such a good question. I really love it. I really love it. And
Great.
We've talked about, like, I'm pretty emotions forward. I have a level of comfortability and safety in my own body, which I've done a lot of work somatically to get to a place where my nervous system knows I'm not going to die if I start feeling something that feels big.
Yeah.
So once again, it kind of lends itself to this idea of like, because I'm the age I am,
Yeah.
now I feel really ready.
Yeah.
In like a je ne sais quoi kind of way. And I think what's so cool about acting is that with dance, there is a certain level of disassociation, and I use that word like super lightly, but I think it just is clear. Just in terms of like, some days you have stuff that, whether it's an injury or pain in the body or just a rumination, that is like really going to distract, take away from. That I got pretty good at being specific about disassociating, and it was like kind of like this beautiful escape that I would just go to the studio and be like, well, I know my brain's not going to chew on that for a couple of hours because all I have to do is just do the steps.
Yeah.
Just do the steps. And there is kind of an element of like control and safety and something that feels just energetically a little bit tighter or smaller.
It's almost like aggressive.
Yes, and actually, funnily enough, there's like a masculine part of me that comes online in the studio because I know how to make my body do that. And not to say that that's super healthy, but like I know how to manipulate that.
Yeah, it's healthy. Well, I mean, like whether or not it's healthy, it's necessary.
Yeah.
Right? Like at the end of the day, if you're a mathematician and you're working on like, we're gonna create green energy, or you're like, we're gonna weaponize enriched plutonium, like it's still just math.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like, you have this skill set and it depends on what you apply it to as to whether or not it's a positive or negative.
Right.
Like
Sometimes
it's super useful for you.
Sometimes it requires me to not let the squishiness of who I am into the room that day, because I can't be a puddle because someone needs to lift me, and my like literal structure needs to have a strength to it.
Right.
And with acting, at least so far that I found in the conversations we've had about playing all the keys that are available, there's just like all of that can be in the room, and not to the point where I'm going to exploit the trauma or the big emotions or the big feelings or whatever has happened, but there is just kind of this honoring and like permission slip for it all to be present.
Yeah.
And there's this part of me that starts to lean away and potentially has like a mechanism of aversion, because in the studio that doesn't get to come to play today because it will limit the result or the product. And with acting, I feel like that's not the case. It's not going to limit it as long as we point it in the right direction, or like I don't try to control it. The less I try to control it, the more like available I'll be, as you mentioned, like to play the sharp notes, to play the sharp keys, which actually is going to bring my authenticity and my individual approach at this character, that people will go, oh, why is that interesting? I don't know what that thing is, but that's a thing.
Yeah.
And I think when I'm like performing on stage and dancing on stage in showtime, I really allow all of that. I'm obsessed with this word allow, but I really, all of it's welcome and can be super helpful.
It's almost like, it's like doing roll call, being like, hey, who's here today? Cool.
Yeah.
And you might be needed, you might not, but you have to be here.
Yes, totally. Like the entire, everyone needs to be online, everything needs to be online. And then I have adrenaline, so I'm not just gonna melt. Right. Even if I'm crying on stage because the big things are coming through and coming forward and these parts of me are online, I will get it done.
Right.
And it just feels like acting is different. Same but different.
Yeah, do you mind if I pause? Because I want to build off of what you just said. It's like those things come online when you're dancing, and in certain cases you have to ignore them because you have to get this done.
Yeah.
Acting is literally the exact opposite. These things come online, and if you don't lean into them, then you are doing the job wrong. And this is not me saying like lean into them at the expense of the story you're telling, but you're in the middle of the story and these things come online. It's because they're relevant to the story, whether you like it or not. Lean in. That's what the money's for. Lean in.
Totally.
And that's such a it's so challenging. I said that's what the money's for, but it is like, it's not for the that comes easy. It's not for like season 20 of Vampires in Love, the musical. It's for those moments when that thing hits you and it's about, and a part of you that you are not ready for, you do not like, is being asked to be in the safe container of the story. Like there is safety for the discomfort, and it's like the civilian leans away, the amateur leans away. They're like, ouchie, I don't like, never again, one day I'll just die, having ignored that and turning it into cancer. The actor is like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
It's a totally different mindset because it's anti-protectionist.
Yes.
The story protects you. That's being done by somebody else.
Totally. And we talked about this week. Like the script we were working with, I didn't feel unsafe. There was nothing like poking at personal trauma, none of it. But that like sort of like aversion crept up a bit.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, you're right. Like I was kind of avoiding that hot note.
Yeah.
And didn't even recognize it. But if that's something I've practiced for a really long time, it's just kind of like unpracticing that and like turning the dial down on that a little bit, and like teaching my body basically. And the more I do it, that like this is how we play. This is and I have access to it, and it's available. Like it doesn't feel that far away. Yeah. And I'll use like a very specific example because it happened yesterday. So we talked about. In our last session, the perfectionism coming online, and you asked me, well, how does it make you feel? Yeah. Like, what does perfection bring up for you? And it was like hot, like I was very activating, and like some anger and some frustration in these parts of me that were like fighting against it. But even just the responsiveness of that brought me into the room in a different way, brought me into the story, because it's, I'm getting this person off a bomb. My perfectionist would be there. I would like to save the life perfectly. Yes. And so that was like, oh my God, juicy. Yes, there's space for this. I don't need to have grace and compassion and just integrate all these parts of myself right now. I can be mad that part of me is showing up and then just go there. Yes. Versus yesterday, I was in a rehearsal and I've taken some time off for an injury and I was partnering again for the first time in 5-6 weeks. My perfectionist showed up because I felt really out of my body. Yeah. And what was super unhelpful was leaning into my perfectionist at that time, because if I was angry and frustrated about how perfect I wanted to be, I wasn't going to surrender into the momentum of my partner. And to be partnered, there's a certain like letting go that has to happen. Yes, of course. And a trust and a knowing that I know how to do this and I'm gonna have flaws, and that I needed that compassion yesterday, and to not lean into the ouch of the perfectionist. Yeah. And as I did that, rehearsal got easier. Great. And so it was this like, I felt and saw both versions. And again, I think it's like acting feels so true and interesting and exciting because it works in this totally opposite way. I love that. I love like the concept of perfectionism. I think one of the things that we talked about, and we're going to need to bring this ship into land at some point. And I think this is a good sort of thing to end it on. The noblest parts of us want to pursue perfection, but the noblest parts of us want to do a lot of dumb shit. Right? Like the quest for the Holy Grail. Noble undertaking, never found it. Yeah. Never gonna find it. Yeah. It's like perfection is impossible. Yeah. And I think we want to be perfect because we love it so deeply. And I think that is a reframe that's so much more useful. Hey, I love this so much. It's showing up with a lot of heat. Cool, let's go, as opposed to, and I must be perfect, because what a waste of time. What a waste of time. And that's why I do often really just bring it back into, are you doing the thing or are you not doing the thing? Because it's like, there's a job of work in front of you. Whether you believe that you can be perfect doing it or not is completely inconsequential. By the way, you can't be perfect. Yeah, I was just gonna say, perfect is also quite boring. Doing it or not has nothing to do with doing it perfectly. No. Because you doing it, you grabbing that mug out of the cupboard is doing it, and I could do it, but do it a totally different way. We both got the mug.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's the thing. I say this a lot. You give the same role to the five, your 5 favorite actors. They're going to be 5 completely different performances of that role. Neither is going to be better or worse, right?
Yeah.
And yet they're going to be literally totally different. And here's the thing too, in our industry, there's so many moving parts that even if you're the first actor ever to get the perfect take, some AC camera guy's gonna buzz the focus. Like it's a useless pursuit. It's totally useless. So I find it so interesting that we all get so caught up on that as opposed to just like narrow in on the task, point everything towards the task. I have been ending these things by asking folks, and to me this is really interesting because past you didn't know they wanted to be an actor. But I've been asking if you could go back to like 18-year-old you or just starting out you with one piece of advice, what do you think it would be?
Interestingly enough, I always did sort of want to be an actor. I will say that.
Sweet.
It felt further away or more out of reach than dance, or just the way the chips kind of fell.
Yeah.
But it's always sort of in the undercurrent, always sort of had that. So I imagine, not necessarily like get into acting sooner, but there's definitely something coming up for me about like courage and bravery. And it's not like fear is always going to be there.
Yep.
And bring it with you, because fear also often like points in the direction where the most growth and the most fulfillment is going to be. And I think this is advice I still need right now. Like if it's just activating you a little bit in a safe way, but like bringing something up, charging you, that's probably a direction that you could step towards.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's probably a lot to learn there. And so 18-year-old me move towards the way of being and the vulnerability that I was pretty afraid of, and started, how do I want to say this? I started making myself smaller to be accepted and to fit in and to walk the path the way I had seen so many other people walk the dance path, the professional path. Which makes sense, right? Like we copycat, that's how we learn at first. When we're babies, we watch people do, and then we mimic and we mirror, and that's how it happens. And also, if I had potentially not let the fear get so big and scary that I wouldn't have waited so long to just try it my way.
Cool, I love that.
And so,
go for it.
Yeah, I'm trying to hang on to that in these moments of story around you're 36, it's too late, what the hell are you doing? You're an amateur, you can't do, no one's paying you to do this, you're paying all this money to do this right now. I'm like, is it that little bit of scary? And can you have so much radical trust in the fact that you're doing this at just maybe in a different order or in a new kind of way? And when you haven't seen it done like that, that means anything's possible. That means you tell me what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yes, exactly.
So
yeah, fear is going to be a part of it, and courage is a choice that you can make every day. It's, and I think that's such great advice. It's also like just very industry relevant. I don't know what this industry is going to look like 5 years from now. I can tell you that like going to rooms to watch people dance, probably not the growth market that it was 200 years ago when people were like, well, these, like, all we got is rooms and dancing, and so this is the thing. It's like, what is next? We don't know. And as creatives, leaning into whatever is lighting you up.
Yeah.
So important.
Instead of needing to have seen it be done a certain way, and that's the only way that you can be successful with it.
Yes.
And in the end, it was like, I made some choices out of fear, kept myself a little bit smaller, and eventually, 5-6 years later, when I was 24, 25, I had to do it a different way, and I was doing it a different way.
Yeah.
So it happened anyway.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
I appreciate you very much. I appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable about this. Like, you're coming into this at such a crossroads crossroads in the way that like there are many avenues available to you. And that's a vulnerable place to be, and I think it's a vulnerable place to share from. And so I'm so grateful that you were willing to come and sit down and operate from there in this conversation. It means a lot. And I'm grateful to be a part of your process. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where you go from here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. It's been really nice to put language to, I've been trying not to like dissect this transitional moment because it feels big and scary and all the things I was just talking about, but it's actually like my body is really comforted by being able to dialogue about it. So thank you very much.
It's my genuine pleasure. Woo! All right, that's that. We did it. The DNA Podcast.